All right.
Okay, we're recording. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Adamson, and today we're doing a special talk with Chloe from the Chloe Connection. Say hi, Chloe.
Hey, everyone. Happy to be here.
Oh, sorry. All right, so two things about Chloe. Chloe is a YouTuber on trans topics. You should go over to her channel and subscribe. She does a lot of really cool videos. Second of all, Chloe is an expert on the vagina and the experience of going through her own vaginoplasty. And I know you shake your head, but you have gone through this and I haven't. So I consider you an expert. And then, yeah, I guess we'll take it from there. Our conversation that we want to have today is talking about like getting a vaginoplasty. What's that like? What are some of the constraints involved in like your expectations going in and then coming out, and like what's the experience been with it? So these are sort of some of the questions we're going to talk about today. I don't have a vagina, and it's something that I'm actually on the fence with. So I look forward to exploring this with you today, Chloe. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So where do you want me to start?
I was about to ask you, where do you want to start? I think the first thing that would be really interesting to talk about is what your expectations were of getting a vagina versus like after having your vagina, like what your experience has been.
Okay. I think for me, like, I didn't have a lot of strong expectations, which I think helped me in the end and didn't set me up for like disappointment. Because I know some trans women are like, I need X amount of depth, or I need to be able to orgasm, or whatever it is. I mean, obviously I wanted to be able to orgasm and I wanted some depth, but it wasn't like I need this perfect designer vagina or anything like that. It was mostly, the biggest piece for me was like, I don't want my penis. That gives me dysphoria. It's like, it just gives me dysphoria daily to have a penis. It gave me dysphoria whenever I tried to be intimate with anybody. And the bigger piece for me was just wanting to feel more comfortable in my body. And, as long as it worked and made me feel more comfortable, those were the main pieces. Like the details, there's a little wiggle room in terms of that.
When you say worked, like how are you defining worked for yourself?
I mean, for me, it's just like, do I have the ability to orgasm? Yes, I do. I have the ability to orgasm if, I'm with a partner or if I'm masturbating, whatever it may be. Things work, and it doesn't give me dysphoria like prior to, if I would orgasm while I had a penis or anything like that. Might not even get to that point because it would just feel icky. It's kind of like whenever I was intimate with partners, I'm like, let's just do everything from the waist up. Don't just, let's pretend that doesn't exist. But that's hard to pretend that doesn't exist. It's very hard, yeah. Lots of mental and emotional energy goes into ignoring that, which really took me out of the moment. And I think that's like another part of it working, is it allows me to just be more present with myself, my body, anybody I'm with, who's, I'm able to share that experience with.
If you were to compare your, I'm diving into the sex part because I'm really curious about this. If we're talking about comparisons of orgasm experiences, like how you would describe your initial experience of an orgasm before a vagina, and then what that's like after, and you don't need to describe the before, but how does that contrast with the after experience of having a vagina? Like, what is that orgasm like, if you could put some words to it? Because I'm sure it's different, obviously, but how is it different?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some of these changes, I think, started because of hormone therapy too, but I feel like there's more of a full body effect to the orgasm. It's more like a ripple effect, kind of feeling it throughout my body, kind of feeling like there's like, if it's weird, it's like there's more of a powerful release from like a bodily perspective, but there's not all the mess. That's just to put it nicely, is like there's not really much that comes out, and that might vary based on how the surgeon does the surgery, but you're removing the testicles, you're removing the male gonads, for lack of a better way to say it, and so you're not going to be having that ejaculate to at least not to the same extent. There might be a little pre-cum or something like that that might come out, but for the most part, I feel like the release is more just, you kind of feel a release, you kind of feel like your orgasm, you feel like you're coming in a way, but it's more, I don't know, it's hard to describe.
Oh yeah, super hard to describe. That's why I'm asking you to describe it.
And this is obviously my experience. It probably varies from other trans women, but I mean, to put it succinctly, I'd say it's much, much better because it's a release that I actually enjoy because all the parts feel in sync. And I think that's the most important
mentally
point.
and physically.
Yeah, and I think that's a part that makes it more enjoyable because I feel like I'm more allowed to enjoy it. I can fully let myself go into it rather than trying to be like, let me try to pretend that my penis doesn't exist. Let me try to pretend that I'm not getting an erection and that's super distracting and uncomfortable. Let me just try to ignore all this when I'm like really only half there.
Yeah,
And
it's
now
like you have to
fully be there.
The work, like a part of your world doesn't exist in that experience.
Yeah, it's like being in two places at once and not doing either of them well.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, 10 out of 10, don't recommend.
So you said something in there that I thought was interesting, which is, oh no, actually you didn't say this. This was just like another thing that I thought of is like, now that you have a vagina, but it's through surgery, you have essentially this opening in your body where your body will want to kind of like naturally seal it off. And I hear this is mostly during the beginning stages that you have to be most careful about it. But how is it now? Like, how long have you had has it been since your vaginoplasty? And like, how has like the self-care routine related to this been? Is it an inconvenience? Is it an additional thing that's worth it? Like, where do you kind of sit in your experience of taking care of your vagina?
Yeah, great question. It's been just over 3 years. I had my vaginoplasty December of 2017. I had to do the math in my head as you were talking. Yeah, and I would say like, that's the whole point behind dilation is, the body your body's not used to having that vagina there. And if you essentially don't force it to stay open with dilation, then it will close. You will lose depth. You will lose width. There is even a risk of it fully closing up, which obviously nobody wants that. It kind of would ruin the whole point of having the surgery. But yeah, I mean, you're right that it is much more important in those first months, like those first, like 3 months especially, probably the first 12 months really, it's important. And obviously I'm not a doctor, I'm not a plastic surgeon here. This is just based on my own experience and talking to a bunch of doctors. But typically most will say that dilation is a lifelong thing. But the further out you get, the less frequently you can do it. At the beginning, you're doing it probably 3, 4, 5 times a day, every day, depending on what dilators you're using, whatever your doctor recommends. But when you're like 2 years out, you might only be doing it once or twice a week. And if you're supplementing that with toys or being penetrated by a partner or anything like that, you probably won't have to dilate as often because in a way that would supplement dilation.
More sex, less dilation. Got it.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
I mean, to an extent, because, if your partner or the toys that you and your partner or partners are using don't match the size of the dilator, then you could still lose some depth and width.
So it's got to be the right size. You have to kind of like compare their junk with your expectations of the dilator.
Sure, that's exactly what I said. I will say though, do as I say, not as I do. I'm not very great with dilation, I will admit, and I'm not very sexually active. So, yeah, I mean, for me, like the bigger piece is again feeling more comfortable in my body, and I do put off dilation more than I should. But like I said, do as I say, not as I actually do.
Yeah, that's a well-spoken psychologist thing to say. So for you, like now, how do you feel about it in retrospect, comparing what you were expecting? Because you go into it thinking, okay, it's going to help my body dysphoria. As long as it works, this is all good. But now you're 3 years in. Like, how's it affected you? What are some of the unexpected things? And what were some of the expected things that you kind of can check off?
Well, I'd say like some of the main pieces are still there in terms of like, I'm happy I got it from like the perspective of feeling more comfortable in my body, feeling like everything's kind of just right. Like this is how things were supposed to be all along. And that's still there, which is great. And I don't expect that to go away anytime soon, if ever. I mean, I definitely had my share of complications early in my surgery that um, complications are unfortunately not unheard of, especially for something as major as vaginoplasty. Um, that was unexpected and something I wouldn't wish on anyone. Urethral stricture is what I had, which is relatively uncommon, but it does happen where their urethra closes
Oh
almost
God.
completely, making it very difficult, if not impossible, to go to the bathroom.
Oh no.
Um, not to scare anyone, it's relatively rare, and
Well, you're fine now. You got through it,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. And the revision surgery was pretty minor. It was only like an hour, and I left the hospital the same day. The only drawback was having to be on a catheter a second time. That's probably my least favorite part of the recovery process. Catheters are just weird. Um, but in terms of where I am now, I mean, there are some pieces that, um, I'd want to change. It's one of those things where like I've considered like maybe one day I'll get a revision.
Oh, where does
Just
surgery ever end? That seems like a
yeah,
question we were just talking about on
it
your
was.
channel.
Yeah. But it's just kind of like, there's some aspects of like the appearance isn't quite what I wanted. It wasn't like a two-stage surgery. There wasn't a labiaplasty that was really involved with the surgery. So from aesthetics, there are some things that I would want. I don't think I need it, so it's not something I'm in any hurry to get. And the way my surgeon did it, there's like a little bit of excess erectile tissue. Um, Depending on who you ask in terms of surgeons, some would say that should not be there, some would say it should, but it does kind of get in the way sometimes in terms of swelling when I get aroused, and
I
it
see.
can make it more difficult to, access the vaginal canal, for lack of a better way to say it. So I mean, there's a few pieces that aren't perfect by any means, but I don't regret it by any means. I'm very happy that I did have a vaginoplasty. Um, in retrospect, I'd say I probably would have done a little more research and gone with a different surgeon. Um, so that would be, if I'm here to give advice to, that would be a big piece of advice. And make sure you do a lot of research in terms of the doctor you go with. Make sure they can, if you have certain goals that you want in terms of like how you want it to look, how deep you want it, or if depth isn't important, get a sense of what they do for aftercare. That's a big piece. All these things I kind of learned after the fact that would have been helpful to know in advance.
Yeah,
But
that's a really good point. If there was maybe like one topic or one question to explore when interviewing these surgeons, what would you ask? What would be the thing you would say, you should definitely ask this and really kind of like look at this across other surgeons?
that's a great question. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like the handful of surgeons I have interviewed. Like, what did I ask them? Um,
Well,
I
you
mean, for
said,
me,
sorry, you said that there were some things you didn't ask or didn't know about, or you would have gone to a different
yeah,
surgeon. What kind of questions related to that would have helped you understand that you should have gone to a different surgeon?
I think one of the bigger pieces would be kind of a multi-part question, but asking like, what is having a better sense of what you know, the recovery process looks like with this particular surgeon and their team. Like, what are they going to do if you have problems? Like, how many checkups are you getting after the surgery? You know, what are the expectations in terms of dilation and other things you might need to do, especially in those first few weeks? I think really getting a sense of like how much the doctor does for their patients once the surgery is complete. Because there are a lot of doctors that, you know, after surgery, it's kind of like, all right, you're gone, you're out in the world, you're kind of on your own. And there are some doctors out there that are, you know, have like kind of a pretty strict regimen in terms of like, okay, this week we're doing this, next week we're doing this. Here's all the ways, all the things we suggest if you do have complications. You know, here's how to access, you know, me and my staff through email or phone number, things like that. And I think that's a very important part that's overlooked because, like I said, complications, hopefully nobody has them, but they're unfortunately not uncommon for such a major surgery. So I think it's important to have a team that's able and also willing to be able to get to you in a timely manner. Those were all things that were not the case for my surgery in terms of I never once saw my doctor after my surgery, not even at the hospital while I was recovering.
Wow.
When I had complications, the earliest they could get me in was like 8 weeks, which is pretty bad for a situation that could put me in the ER at any moment. I ended up having to get surgery with a different surgeon who, thankfully, I lucked out that the university near where I lived had a urologist who had experience with post-op trans women. So it's like very fortuitous, but that is not the case probably for a lot of people. So I think, yeah, that would be my biggest thing is like really getting a sense of all the aftercare, all the recovery stuff, because those first few weeks, those first few months are rough. And if you have problems, you want somebody that's going to take care of you right
Well,
away.
yeah, it's like you really need that. That totally makes sense. That's something I underestimated for my own surgeries was the aftercare, what's involved. Luckily, for my experience of breast and FFS, my surgeons already have a process for that, and they set it up, and they're like, "You need to do this," and I'm like, "Oh, okay, I need to." That's why I'm sticking around in LA because I need to see my breast surgeon every like 3 weeks or something. But I feel like that's something that can get overlooked because you think everything's up to that point and you go, great, I'm done. We can kind of call it a day. But no, there's this whole after part that can kind of get overlooked really easily. Chloe, thank you for coming on the show today. We don't do these much on my channel. And so it's such a pleasure to have someone else come in and do the speaking for me.
Happy to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm glad we're able to do a little collaboration.
Yeah, I think
Videos
it's
on each
awesome.
of our channels.
Yeah. So yeah, if you guys are interested, go check out Chloe if you don't already know about her. She's got an awesome channel. If you're interested in learning more about her vagina, she has plenty of videos on that, as well as like many other trans topics. So yeah, with that, I'm going to close the session. Once again, thanks for joining, and we'll see you guys in another episode soon. Bye.
Bye.